Hey everyone, welcome to Group Dentistry Now and the third episode of Dental Cyberwatch Live. We appreciate working with Talon Security. They have been a great partner, and we've been doing the Dental Cyberwatch column now for 2 years, and we've expanded it into a podcast format. Like I said, it's episode 3, and we actually have with us Matt McGaw, who is joining us from Costa Rica. So thank you, Matt. We appreciate that. And of course, Gary Salman, who is the co-founder and CEO of Talon Security. Matt is founder of DSO Compass. And he also has a newer company that he's going to talk about. He's the co-founder and chief development officer of Relay. So Gary and Matt, I'm really interested in this conversation. I just want to let the audience kind of know, I'm going to give you some highlights of the conversation. Then I want some quick intros here. But we're going to talk about, and I feel like this is more of a Halloween theme because we are going to talk about shadow AI, the AI graveyard. We're going to talk about AI, GRC. Then we'll talk a little bit about a concept called design backward and build forward. It's a strategy that I just learned about recently. But that's what we're going to talk about today, and probably a whole host of other things. But Matt, maybe for the couple of folks that don't know you, you're pretty well known in the DSO space. A little bit about your background and DSO Compass and your new organization, Relay.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Gary and I took a picture in this resort, Las Catalinas, back at the destination DSO. What was that, February?
Yeah.
Gary?
Yep.
Few months
February,
back.
March. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm here again, and I'm here for Gary whenever he needs anything. We've known each other a while now, man. But yeah, I've been in the dental space, gosh, since 2008. So, almost 20 years. A lot of focus the last few on evaluation of technology and all things. And the new business that Bill, you mentioned, is called Relay. And I realized that the gap that existed in my, support as, a consultant of sorts is like the implementation side of things on the DSO front. Like I'd never been inside that room, and I now have a partner that has been, and Dave Salsiccioli. So the evaluation to implementation to scaling across, mid-market practices, he brings that. So we focus on making sure that vendors not only have a good plan in place to support that implementation, but also the DSOs have a good onboarding plan in place to make sure that, all things implementation are done well. And a part of that is kind of why Gary and I are probably all chatting today, is that once you implement those platforms, you really need to make sure that they're secure, that your cyber risks are lowered. So yeah, that's definitely a part of my conversations with folks. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.
Gary, and I don't know if you necessarily need to introduce yourself, but I'd love to just maybe get an update on what Talon Security is up to. I know you've got a lot of new innovative solutions out there, so maybe we can focus on that.
Yeah. We're really trying to move the needle as quickly as possible, especially around the AI front. Shortly, we're going to be rolling out some significant enhancements to our cybersecurity platform, Eagle Eye. So we AI enabled that back in November. That was kind of our initial rollout, or phase 1. Phase 2 should be rolling out here in a week or two. And that's really going to enhance our AI capabilities. So you'll actually be able to have conversations now with our dashboard and our platform. So if you're in charge of security for your organization, instead of clicking around on a dashboard and trying to find data, you can actually just ask the Eagle Eye bot, and they'll come back with recommendations and information and look at data in very different ways than you can present it in graphs and charts. So we're really excited about that. That's been basically under development since we released version 1. And I think it's changing the game. You get people who are wanting to now, interact with things versus clicking on things. So we're excited about that. And then if we have some time, we have a whole new AI platform coming out that is really going to be a game changer. We've showed it to a bunch of our enterprise clients, so some of those medium to large size DSOs, and we'll talk about it. I think it's really going to change the way people utilize AI in the dental space.
Excellent. Yeah, that's well, we talked a little bit about it a couple days ago, and I'm pretty excited. We definitely want to share that with the audience as well. Matthew, you really, the one thing that you do with DSO Compass, which I really like, is you have this newsletter that you put out, which is It's unlike a lot of newsletters that it's really has a lot of in-depth information. You spend a lot of time on it. So I appreciate that. And we learn a lot from that. So hopefully we can get some of that advice that you share in that newsletter. And we'll make sure at the end that people can drop the way to sign up for that newsletter. Let's talk about shadow AI, because I feel like, so AI is moving quickly. And then there are, I guess, this new terminology that or things that are happening because AI is being used. Some are very positive, and some maybe are not so positive. And this is where I think the cybersecurity side comes in and protecting your organization. So let's talk a little bit about what shadow AI is, and maybe some best practices around that.
Yeah. I mean, I think we witnessed that at the event we were just at, Bill, right? We had about 20 business leaders in the DSO space, everything from 10 locations to a couple hundred. And at the end of the event, we spent a lot of time talking about AI and implementation and the different technologies. And I asked a really interesting question, which LLMs are you using? Which frontier models are you using? And, it was interesting. Some people had their heart set on, hey, I'm just using Claude or I'm ChatGPT. But I would say a majority of them said they use a little bit of all of them. So I think the challenge here with shadow AI is a lot of organizations have no control over what their employees have access to. So if they want to throw information to ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, it's a free for all, right? And there's no controls in place. There's no SOP, really talking about what is allowed to be put into these models, what's not allowed to be put in. How do you protect confidential information? And we're not just talking about patient data, but it could be operational documents, it could be SOPs, it could be HR. How many people are loading financial statements and documents into these platforms? And often they're not understanding the risks associated with that. And that's a real problem. And then the other thing is they may have documents in place that tell the employees what they can and can't use from an AI perspective, but there's no controls in place to police that. So they may say, hey, we're only allowed to use Gemini, right? But you have employees like, I don't like Gemini, so I'm going to use ChatGPT. And there's no way of anyone finding out that they're using it because they don't have any type of technology to detect that. So I think in my mind, for the dental space, that's typically the problems we're seeing with shadow AI. I know, Matt, you probably have some thoughts on this as well.
I think of it like this. Back in the vendor world, any world really, like you give a company a laptop to somebody and you tell them like, don't use it for personal use and monitor it, right? You're still going to maybe check ESPN.com or in my case, NFL.com, BuffaloBills.com. Like it all gets monitored, right? It's harmless stuff. The reason I wrote about this, my newsletter, and Bill, thanks for the compliment about doing the research. When I started it, I didn't know how deep I was going to go. And I've gotten that comment about going deep, and I do. And one of the ways I went deep is to talk to Gary about this. And individuals are just like they're going to go to ESPN.com, NFL.com, are still going to do the thing that they want to do. And when you are putting like an entire HR handbook inside of ChatGPT and then wanting to utilize it for a resource, yes, it makes you more effective, but ultimately you're providing information that shouldn't be out there into the universe. When you ask ChatGPT or Claude or whoever it is right now, like give me an example of, how like a DSO would be set up. Can you imagine like a year from now, like querying AI and have that example be like the exact example from a DSO because some employee put that information inside of it? Like that's the world that we live in. I don't think folks understand that when you type that information, it goes into this black box of sorts, then who know, and a great answer comes out on the other side, but who knows how many things that's touching. And I think you don't want to live in this world of like scaring people, but ultimately this is a new thing for all of us. And making sure that we do things the right way with the right governance is super important, especially when it comes to this version and this shadow AI we're talking about.
I think that's a great point. When you look at AI, and Gary, I'm sure you can touch on this more, but you're typing in information, and some of it is benign and would be fine for not only to be out there, but then for chat to learn and then teach everybody else, right? Or share that information with everybody else. But to your point, Matt, what happens if you put in your secret sauce for your DSO? Now, a year later, somebody else is starting up a competitor in the same market and all your information is out there. And well, guess what? Chat or Claude has learned from what you've given it and can now share that with everybody. And there are ways, of course, to protect that and keep that internal, but I don't know how many people understand how to do that yet. And like you said, you have one rogue employee, and maybe there's nothing malicious, but they just don't like Claude and they use chat and they use the free version, and all of a
Yep.
sudden it's out there.
Yeah, look, there's settings, right? You can turn on that, tell it not to learn from your information. But what I always tell everyone, when the product's free, you're the product. Like,
Yeah.
they're not doing you a favor by giving you their platform for free. So you may upload your entire marketing plan, for your DSO, right? Or your acquisition plan, and the LLM may take it. Maybe they'll anonymize it, but Bill, to your point, they're probably going to kick it back to someone else that asks that question. Same thing Matt said, right? That's kind of how this all works. So yeah, I think people need to think. We're in a world right now where our society wants instant answers, regardless of the risk. Right? Just tell me what I need to know. And there's no thought process anymore in terms of what the risk is. I'm a huge fan of this technology, right? I wasn't a year ago, but I'm fully committed to it. But we got to be smart about what we do, and that comes with helping your organization understanding what is appropriate and what is not appropriate when it comes to AI.
I'm curious. You're the question asker here, Bill, but I'm curious what's changed, Gary, in that year.
Yeah. So when it first came out, right? Let's say I'll do air quotes for first, right? Let's say when it first became heavily adopted, I think most people had no concept of how this technology was working, and they would go in and load anything. Then I think some people got a little bit smarter. They realized, oh, maybe there's a security setting in here that I can turn on that maybe protects my information, right? And nothing's ever 100%. We know that. So there's that aspect of it. I also, when I first started playing with this like 3 years ago, there's a lot of incorrect answers being given by AI. And I was like, we're not quite there yet. And if you started using ChatGPT probably 3 years ago, remember, maybe four now, maybe it was loaded with like older data. You could never ask it anything relevant to today. Now it's basically real time. So I think there were a lot of challenges back then, and people were doing research and asking questions and didn't understand those concepts like, oh, this could be 2 or 3 year old data. And the answers it's providing me could actually be incorrect. And then I saw how quickly this technology is evolving, right? I've always been on the forefront of technology. I built, my 30 something year career, I built the very first cloud system for the oral surgery market back in the 90s. I built the very first wireless patient checkout system just prior to that. So I've always tried to be kind of on the cutting edge because that's what I love. And when I started really digging in with AI and understanding what its capabilities are and will be, I said, there's no way that this technology is just going to disappear. It's going to morph, right? I think there may be some consolidation. There's a lot of startups right now. I think just like any new kind of frontier, things will fail, things will succeed. So it's a little bit of the Wild West. But in the end, I truly believe that healthcare is one of the best industries to benefit from this technology. I think it's going to revolutionize, even in dentistry. I think it's going to start revolutionizing the way we do things, especially with like implants and diagnostics and imaging and revenue cycle and all those things that we're struggling with as a vertical. It's really going to help out there. So long-winded answer, Matt, but yeah. And then the other thing actually is our companies start playing with threat detection, right? And when I saw what AI could do to detect threats and mitigate threats and literally take almost a human approach to fighting back against hackers, I was like, all right, this is sick. This is an amazing technology, right? That it can actually do things quicker than a human can do.
Well, Gary, you touched on something. You talked about how you really believe, and I do too, that it's going to drastically change how I think a lot of things, probably everything, right? How businesses operate. But if we stick to dentistry, there are a lot of solutions out there now in the market, right? There's a lot, overwhelming amount of solutions, I think. I touched on this when I was introducing the topics we were going to discuss today, this design backward, build forward strategy that we learned about from Andy Farina, who was teaching a leadership class at Destination DSO. And can you talk a little bit about this? Because this, I think, leads into that. A lot of solutions out there, overwhelming. How do you kind of take this design backward, build forward strategy and really apply that in a DSO or dental practice?
I think the challenge that we often see in this space is organizations go to these dental trade shows, and this happens in medical too. I do a lot of medical, right? So this isn't just dental. Organizations go to these shows, they see some company that has some new AI technology that appears to solve some problem that they have. And then what they do is like, okay, I want that. Then it starts to fall apart very quickly. Right. They don't truly understand what their need was. So I think what this concept is really talking about is if you're the DSO, one of the most important things you need to do is understand the problem you're trying to solve. Right. So if your problem is image analysis, right, and you would like to speed that up for potential detection of caries or, better implant placement or for revenue cycle management, start with one of those and then jot down every single thing you're trying to solve and then work backwards from there. And then align that with the product you're looking at. So if your RCM problem is 10 issues, then you're going to go to that AI company and say, hey, here are my 10 issues. Here's my top issue. Here's my, my 10th, for 1 to 10, right? And make sure that technology is solving that problem. And I think the other side of this is building applications. I think sometimes organizations build applications thinking that it's solving a problem for a dental group or a DSO, and they haven't done their research, right? They're just looking at it from a different perspective than most organizations. So they're designing this product and then they're trying to present it to DSOs like that solves 2 of my 10 problems. That's not quite it. So I would argue you could apply this to both sides of the equation, the buyer and the seller. And I think when those two align, you can have a really good product. But I would really recommend, and I've done this for a long time, not to just pull the trigger because you see a shiny penny in a product. And we kind of joked about this before the podcast started. Unfortunately, there's a lot of shiny pennies flying around right now. But there's also a lot of gold coins, right, that are doing amazing things for organizations. So stay away from the shiny penny and buy the gold.
I wasn't there for that, but this resonates with me. Like I did a small presentation recently at a Dykema event around my 4 Ps for like product selection. I call them shiny object syndrome, Gary. It's like, hey, shiny object, I'm going to go over there. And then there's the other one. It's like the Hawaiian shirt guy effect. Basically going to a conference and this guy in a Hawaiian shirt that works for XYZ vendor, bought me drinks and I'm going to buy this product now. And that's not a framework for evaluating technology, right? But the problem part is interesting to me because I don't know if you guys have seen this, is that sometimes the problem that they think they have to solve isn't always the problem that is really the problem. And it requires DSOs to go a little deeper inside the organization and look at some data to figure out what that problem is. Because in some cases, if they determine a problem exists and they find a product to match it, that product solves the problem, but ultimately maybe it wasn't that problem. I would also add in the people behind the company. Like you mentioned your experience, and I'll boast on you, Gary, like having an individual that is with a company that understands or founded a company that understands what dental looks like and how all of the processes, its systems, and how these organizations are set up and how they work is extremely important. If you have somebody from outside the vertical that comes in and tries to have this product and solve this problem, in many cases, those individuals like aren't the right people you should partner with. So that sounds like a really interesting discussion, just like the one here was for Destination DSO. So that's good stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it makes you really think. And we've done this at Group Dentistry Now. We've automated some things here, and some of the automations worked extremely well and saved us a lot of time. Other automations have been so clunky and really haven't addressed that problem because we probably didn't necessarily, again, design backward, right? So we found that, you know what, we were better off doing this manually. So there are some things that you are still much better done manually. And so I think that's another thing that you have to, and sometimes, unfortunately, you learn the hard way. You implement a solution and it doesn't work. So I think we'll move on. That was kind of the first part of the Halloween theme. We also have the AI graveyard, which is another interesting thing that's occurring. This is really the fact we talked about all these different AI solutions out there. And there's some that you might not be using anymore, or some that don't have any support anymore. So, or you've got a lot of solutions out there that maybe just aren't being leveraged, but are still on your systems, or you might even still be paying for.
Yeah, look, I think it's a big problem, right? I would say not only with AI, but often in technology in general. I would say I first started seeing it probably in the mid 2000s, where practices were moving to paperless systems and they weren't implemented properly. They weren't planned properly. They weren't trained properly. And you have a contingency of staff that like it. Then you have the other contingency of staff that hate it. And it was just a constant like butting heads, right? And there was a multitude of failure points there. And I would actually say that a very similar thing is occurring today with some of these AI implementations. I know, Matt, you talk about this as well, but you can't just go out and buy this technology. I think some people live in this world where, like, oh, well, AI is just so easy to use. We're just going to do something and something's going to magically happen and everything's just going to work. Like, it doesn't work that way. I hear from a lot of practices that they implemented something and no one was trained on it. And because they weren't trained on it, the doctors are like, this sucks. This is taking me longer to do it. I did it for 20 years this way and I can do it in half the amount of time. And then eventually that mindset goes one of two ways. Either those doctors leave and they aren't part of the practice anymore because the practice has decided we're going forward with this AI, whether or not you like it. The other option is it's implemented properly, it's trained properly, and it's adopted. But what happens all too frequently is when you're missing a couple of those steps, the adoption is going to be very low. The frustration is going to be very high. The ROI is going to be very low. And at some point, you're going to be like, I can't take this anymore, right? We're just going to shut this down. And now you've committed to a 1, 2, 3 year contract, and that's just going to live in the basement per se, or in the graveyard as we call it, and you wasted a whole bunch of money on something that actually may have been a good product. So I think in the end it could be summarized as a process failure. The organization failed to properly implement a new technology, and then I think you also have what we were discussing previously, which is they bought the wrong product or they were sold the wrong product, which unfortunately happens also. That's typically what I see in terms of product graveyards. But Matt, I'd love to hear
Yeah.
what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I see a lot of that too. And that's like frankly why we didn't just found this new business because we just decided we wanted to do more work. But at the end of the day, I have in my career, as you guys I'm sure have seen, is there's so much technology that is within DSO specifically, their tech stack, and the amount of tech in that tech stack that is implemented correctly, that is working and providing what I like to just call like true operational impact is a lot of times low. There's a lot of reasons. In some cases, like the vendors, they might not have been completely upfront about whether or not their software, their platform integrates cleanly with the existing systems that this DSO might have. Adoption may just they just may not get buy-in inside the organization, and people, are creatures of habit. They went back to the old system that they were using previously. So it fails there. Workflows are different inside dental practices. And you talk about 15, 20, 30 locations, no matter how much these DSOs want to try and make sure things are integrated correctly and workflows are aligned across the org. A lot of times it doesn't happen. So not being aligned with workflows is another one. And then attach security on top of it. Like if they're not secure in their systems, there can be issues there. And that could have been, like you said, Gary, up front, they're not asking the right questions around whether or not this company is compliant with the way that a dental practice should be. I don't know how many conversations I've been in on the vendor, on the DSO, both sides of it, and that doesn't even come up. Like, how can we implement a platform that doesn't have the correct, whether it's HIPAA, name the acronym, making sure that you're aligned from a perspective is super important as you work through these companies. And what that does is it, like you said, Gary, it's not just AI, but just there's a graveyard of these technology solutions there. I've seen Monday boards that are just half empty. And it's all of a sudden it just stops and the implementation has just died. Yet in some cases, maybe they're even paying for it. So it's definitely a bigger problem than I think most are talking about. And security is a big part of it.
Yeah, 100%. I'm all for startup companies. And one of the things we do with a lot of our group practices and DSOs is we do cyber due diligence on the vendors they want to work with. You know, how do these vendors access the data? Who do they share the data with? How do they store the data? Who from their organization has access to it? What security measures in place? And I think it goes back to the shiny penny syndrome, which is I want it and I don't care. And I think that's where you get into trouble. And a lot of these smaller orgs have the budgets to build out their technology, but they didn't have the budgets to properly implement security and test the security. And then when there's an issue and there's, God forbid, a breach, that breach comes back to the victim, unfortunately, right? That comes back to the DSO group. That's how HIPAA is written. So, you know, often these healthcare entities are the ones that have to pay the price for a breach, not the software provider or the technology provider. So due diligence, right? We can spend half an hour talking on that. Not the most exciting thing, but that has to be part of your equation, right? That has to be a high priority, because if you don't prioritize security, you could have the best solution in the world. And when there's a breach, all those gains you had from efficiency and productivity and cost savings are literally gone overnight.
Yeah, and I'm not sitting here saying I am like the wizard of evaluating technology at all. But I will tell you, when you ask folks that are in seats that just pick the technology, like why they picked it, the plethora of answers that you get,
Never.
it is just like, it is crazy. And a lot of cases, security wasn't a part of that, which should be one of the first, probably the first question you ask. Just
For sure.
making sure if we're going to move further along this list of things we need, I just need to make sure that your stuff's not going to mess up my entire system in my company, right? Like simple question.
Yeah. Look, and I think that's the challenge with AI right now. Everyone, where are we going? Agentic, right? Everything's connecting, doing things, and everyone wants to connect everything to everything because it's going to make it more efficient. And I'm never going to have to walk into my office ever again or take a phone call or answer a message because my agent, Stacy, is going to do everything for me. And sometimes we don't understand, when we agree to connect things, the risk associated with that. So maybe in a year from now, Matt, we'll be back on a call talking about how you and I never have to work again because our agents do everything for us. But right now, I'd be a little cautious with that.
Meanwhile, Stacy's a rat.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Well, as we start to wrap things up here, I wanted to make sure we touched on two final topics. Gary, you wanted to talk, and I wanted to talk about it too, as the new Aura solution. I got a sneak conversation, at least from Gary, about what it is you're unveiling shortly. And I know you've been working on this for quite a while, and the feedback that you've had has been incredible. So, talk a little bit about Aura.
yeah, probably about 9-ish months ago, customers are starting to come to us, and they were really honestly having kind of the conversations we were just having now. Like, hey, we want to use AI for various things. How do we do this securely? And, you know, there's certain things you can do, but in many cases, the price point's just too high for DSOs, right? It gets too costly to really have your own secure LLM system. So we started putting our heads together internally, and we have a lot of really smart, security focused, AI focused people within our organization. And we're like, maybe we can just build out our own system here. And one thing led to another, and we started building out a GRC platform, governance, risk, and compliance, because that was something orgs were asking us about. But I also said, look, that's kind of for very large enterprise DSOs, hundreds of locations that may consider using that. Then we started really understanding what the technology could do, and we started playing with it. And we're like, well, what if we teach it about HIPAA? What if we teach it about OSHA? What if we teach it about HR? Can we potentially have a platform where people can go and start asking basic questions? And then it evolved into, well, why can't we give it the ability for them to upload all of their documentation, their policies and procedures, their SOPs, contracts. I mean, you name it. Employee manuals. That's a big one, right? Everyone's like struggling with an employee manual that they had a company make for them, and just accessing it. So take that manual you bought or consulted with, put it in our platform. It's secure. And that way people who should have access to it can then go in and be like, hey, I'm having a problem with an employee. Help me understand what I need to do. Or an employee can say, hey, what's my workstation use policy? What am I allowed to do? Going back to Matt's point with my laptop, right? So giving them a central point of truth. So conceptually, the platform can learn everything about your practice in your own little world. And then we built some really cool things into it, right? We started worrying about, oh my God, people are going to start uploading patient records and EOBs and things like that. So now the second you go to upload something, prior to being uploaded to our platform, it scrubs any document for anything that's considered confidential. A date of birth, a social security number, healthcare information, things that you probably wouldn't want anyone to see. And then it says, hey, I found these in your document. Do you want me to block them out? Right? You want me to remove that from the document. So if you answer yes, it'll rip it out of the document and then it uploads it. It's fully voice enabled. So you can literally have a conversation. Hey, I need help on this, right? Tell me how I can have a conversation with my employee who is always hostile. And it'll start having that kind of conversation with you. Tell me about the contract that I have with Dr. Smith. What's her salary for the year? Making it up, right? Anything that's in the vault is what we call it. It'll query out of the vault. It'll respond accordingly based on the documentation. It has the ability of looking at all the documents related to your question. So the really cool thing we found out by accident was we created 20 different types of documents that a practice would use. And we asked it a question and it came back and quoted information from multiple document sources and combined it into a singular answer. And it annotates everything so you know where it's coming from. If you ask it a question and it's not in its corpus of knowledge, it'll go out to the outside world, do a search, come back and say, hey, here's the information that I found on the web for you. So that way, this didn't come from an internal document. It came from an external. And the super cool thing is it actually will alert you if it thinks it hallucinated on an answer. So, which is really groundbreaking. And we all worry about that. Like, is it just freaking making this thing up? Or is this real? Now it comes back with a little warning and it basically says, I think there's a likelihood that I may have hallucinated on this answer. So we're all about transparent AI, and this platform is really changing that. And it also basically does what's called hashing a file. So if you upload a document, let's say it's a SOP for your practice or an employee manual, it'll hash it, which basically means that it has tracked every single little character and dot in that document, creates a unique hash, which is a long string of letters and numbers. So it's basically considered now a legal document. If someone goes in there and erases a period in a 500-page document, the hash will change and you'll know that someone actually changed that document. It's a really awesome way of having a strong documentation process in place. But most importantly, I think what the platform does, it gives you what I said before, that single point of truth where you can ask about anything that's going on in your practice or your group and get the correct answers versus something that ChatGPT or someone else is giving you an answer to. And you're not exposing your documents to those LLMs.
And I think last point here, I'd love to, because again, Matt attended the Destination DSO in Costa Rica in February, I think. And then I just got back yesterday from another Destination DSO experience in New Hampshire. So Gary, talk a little bit about this partnership that you have with Support DDS. You two and some other vendors are putting on this really intimate experiential conference, or it's not even a conference. It's really a networking / destination type event. And the one thing that I'll just mention briefly is that it's small enough where you get a chance to really meet everybody, and the experience is a bonding type experience. So you really not only get to meet people, but you get to know them. And I think it's so memorable. That's what makes it different. But go ahead, Gary.
Yeah. And I think that's spot on, Bill. I've been going to dental trade shows since 1992, right? And I think one of the challenges that I see now with certain shows is it's the same speakers, it's the same content, it's the same people. you get like a tiny bit of information. Often the information is not enough to do anything with. You can't go back and like change the way you run your practice. You have some concepts and then you got to kind of dig into it. So about 2.5 years ago, I was talking to JW from Support DDS, and I'm like, hey, I got this idea. Why don't we create these really small, intimate meetings where there's no sales, right? There's no vendors trying to pitch you. We bring in a wide swath of experience from people who have 3 locations to folks that run 1,000, 2,000 location DSO groups, and let them kind of do knowledge sharing, knowledge transfer. Because you know what? There's a lot of really smart people in this industry that have experienced a lot of things and solved problems. And there's also folks that are having problems and they may not know the answer. And sitting down with them on a porch, we were up in New Hampshire, and having a conversation. Hey, Stacy, tell me about your group. Like, what challenges are you having? How have you overcome those? Here's a problem that I'm having. You have any advice for me? Things like that. And then we just do really fun things. We went to Costa Rica. We went to Vermont last fall and did a Land Rover experience where he took Land Rovers through the mountains of Manchester, Vermont. We raced cars down at Porsche in Atlanta. And then we've done this past one, we did Sig Sauer. So we did kind of like a competitive shooting event. It's a world-class facility. So people came and just learned how to shoot targets. And what we heard from a lot of people was they'd never shot before. They didn't really understand what it was about. And it was empowering for them. They learned a lot. And then after that, we did something brand new. It's just like a random thing. We're like, okay, you can run like a military obstacle course if you want, or you can do jujitsu. And I know, Bill, I saw you rolling on the mat there. You're kicking some butt in jujitsu. So I think almost half of the folks that did the jujitsu were women, which was just amazing to see. So they got to shoot in the morning and they got to learn some defensive tactics on the mats. And, you know, a lot of the folks we spoke to, they're like, I've never done anything like this before. This is such a great experience. And then yesterday we had a leadership summit presented by Andy, and he was talking about leadership from a military perspective, which if you think about it, it's different, but it's very much the same. Making very tough decisions under pressure was one of his themes, and how to lead people. So I thought that was great. But I also found it really interesting. I spoke to a couple of the women DSO leaders, and the mantra seemed to be the empowerment. Like, hey, I've never been able to do anything from a self-defense perspective, and to be able to get on the mat and have a way to potentially defend myself. And honestly, I think that the average age was pretty significant. There weren't 20-year-old folks rolling around on the mat. These were folks that have been around for a while, and they loved it. And it was just such a great experience. So yeah, I think it's just it's a new way, new approach for information sharing and connecting with folks. So yeah, they've been a huge hit.
Okay.
The relationships that
Yep.
I have, I attended the one here in Costa Rica at this resort actually, and I still have connections with those individuals from that trip back in February. We're keeping in touch, and it's not just about like, hey Matt, which software is cool right now? Like, what should I focus on? It's about like, how's my now wife? How's the family? I'm asking about like, hey, you went on this Alaska cruise. Where is it? Like it's more in-depth things. They're going to be folks that I see at conferences that I'm giving hugs to, which I find really, really refreshing in an industry full of, in some cases, not all that intentional events. And it's something that I personally would recommend everybody attend, regardless of the topic. So kudos to you, Gary, for starting that with JW. It's good stuff, man.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I love it. It's all
As
about
we-
friendships.
Yeah, exactly right. So as we wrap things up here, Matthew, I want you to do a shout out so people can subscribe to your DSO Compass newsletter. It's chock full of great information. A lot of deep research goes into it. So how would people get access to that and find out how to connect with you?
I appreciate it, Bill. It's download.dsocompass.com. So that it's all my articles are right there, and you can subscribe right on the site.
Thank you, Matt. Gary, if people want to learn about Aura, which is not out yet, but soon to be released, and also if they want to learn how to become part or attend one of these destination DSO events, how do they do that?
Yeah, hit us up. If you go to blacktalonsecurity.com, there's contact us, so you can reach out to us. You can call the 800 number and get more information. If you're interested in joining Destination DSO on a future event, which will be in November in Texas, you can email me, Gary at blacktalonsecurity.com, and we'll put you on the list as a possible attendee.
All right. Thank you both. And thanks everybody for watching the third episode. Until next time, I'm Bill Neumann.